G'day, I'm Nick Clements from YourQS and welcome to our podcast Beyond the Guesstimate. I've been involved in the building sector since 1993 and pretty much the whole time I've been frustrated around how inefficient and unproductive our industry is. And so in this podcast, I explore things along the theme of cost-informing design. I take a very broad view of cost-informing design. So I'm just as interested in business and the things behind the cost as much as I am in the design and construction process. So this week, a bit of an experience at home. We had in the bathroom, we noticed a couple of tiles on the floor lifting and got underneath the house and had a bit of a look and could see some water damage. And I was trying to figure out, it's like a mid-floor. It's a really strange place to have water. And I figured out it must be the toilet that's leaking. And that sort of made me realise that we're in the building industry involved in creating these assets that live for 50 years or more. But tiny little mistakes can cause real big problems. And thinking about that a bit more, talking to one of my mates who's a plumber, so I got him around to have a look and see if we can start figuring out what's going on. And he's saying, you can have a little crock's nut on a copper pipe and it might look perfect, but there's a drip in it and it can cause $100,000 worth of damage. And that reminded me of when I was a young fellow. I worked as a lagger, which was installing insulation on industrial pipework and stuff. And I was working on the Regent Hotel in downtown Auckland. And I was lagging this pipe and it came off on my hand and water started pouring out everywhere. And it took them half an hour to find where the valve was to turn it off. The problem was we were on the roof and it was 8 stories and the bottom 3 were finished and being rented. They had people staying in there and the water went all the way down through it. So there's one tiny little thing. I don't know what it was. It wasn't my fault. It was some connection wasn't quite done up. So maybe in that crock's nut that my plumber was talking about, and we had water down through 8 floors. And it made me realise that one little thing can cause an enormous amount of damage. And if you look at our role in the building industry, so we're QSs, we get a tiny amount of fee out of what the cost of the building project is, but we can potentially make mistakes that can have a really big impact on the cost. And so how we deal with that as a business is we've got a lot of systems and processes where we try and trap potential errors, identify the areas, correct them. And if things go wrong, we also spend time working out, okay, what went wrong? How did we end up with this outcome that we didn't want? And what can we change to try and improve it? Our industry is quite heavily regulated and there's a lot of sort of interwoven regulations that drive a lot of what we do and create potential liabilities for businesses through it. So it starts with the Building Act, then you've got the building code, you've got standards, you've got the consenting process, you've got inspections. So all of that, all the way through, can create problems for people. So the trick is making sure that you have got good processes in place and ensuring that you're doing your bit, you're not being negligent, and any sort of issues you have, you're picking them up before they become real issues further down the train. But I guess today we've got as an expert in this whole thing, and unfortunately he more often than not gets involved when things do go wrong, and it's part of his role was unpicking what went wrong, and ultimately by that stage you got finger pointing trying to put a liability on somebody, so he gets involved in trying to figure that out. And welcome today, we've got Andrew Gray from GBC Group. So Andrew's a building surveyor and he gets involved when these things go wrong. So thanks for coming along, Andrew. So just give us a little bit of background. So firstly, I guess, what does a building surveyor do?
Well, it's a good question. And I must admit, up until about 15 years ago, I didn't know. But a building surveyor essentially is somebody who has the training and experience, a broad range of training experience in the building industry, and then they come along and they will use that training experience to help other people in the industry by doing building investigations. Might be project management, could be advice that we provide, expert witness services. So essentially a building surveyor provides a slightly higher level of training and understanding in the industry that you might normally find within the usual players.
So how did you get into that space then? Did you start off your career as a building surveyor?
No. I first and foremost did an apprenticeship as a youngster, and to this day I've still got my LPB. I'm still licensed. Carpentry, yeah, but carpentry apprentice. I still see myself first and foremost as a builder, always will, I guess. But I always thought I'd get out of it by the time I was 40. Around that age, I figured, you start to get complacent, and I was just waiting for that skill saw to cut my hand off, or, fall off the scaffolding or do something stupid. So, and your body starts to pack up. You know, I had a sore back, and as most builders do.
Yeah, it is a physical job.
It is, yeah. So I got out of it. I wasn't sure what to do, and it just so happened an opportunity came my way to go and work at the then North Shore City Council. They were just going through that. It was around about 2007, 6, 7 to 8, around that period. And they were right in the middle of the leaky building issue.
Yeah, right.
And so North Shore was setting up a leaky building, or I should say a weather tightness department. Auckland City had were a little bit ahead, a few steps ahead, and we were catching up and working with them. And so I entered straight into that part of the council. So I worked there for about a year, and I saw these guys, these building surveyors come and go, and I figured, that looked like a pretty good lark. They earned pretty good money, and I liked the idea of a bit of autonomy and to get out and do my own thing. So I applied to NZIBS,
which is
the New Zealand Institute of Building Surveyors.
Okay.
Became a member. And then you just go through the various stages to transitional membership to full membership. It takes about 3 years.
Right. So the membership, you've got to have some qualifications and experience.
That's right. That's right.
Record.
Yeah. In those days when I first applied, my experience as a builder and as a TA was sufficient to get me in the door. These days they are looking for slightly higher education.
Right.
And I think they're talking about degree courses and diplomas and so forth. Well, a lot of the surveyors come from the UK and with RICS, and they are degree-based building surveyors. And I guess there lies the difference between Kiwi building surveyors and British building surveyors, is that a lot of the Kiwi building surveyors have historically had like me, they've come up through the industry with hands-on. So we have a very good knowledge and understanding of how it's put together in New Zealand, where the RICS have a slightly more education-based,
so theoretical
view on it. And some of them do have a practical, I'm not going to say they don't, some of them do. But there's a good blend in there. So that's pretty much how I got involved. And then very shortly after becoming a member, I decided to go back out on my own, which is, wasn't unusual for me. I've been a builder most of my life, and as builders, you work on your own.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I went and set up on my own. And one of the very first jobs I got was a expensive home in Takapuna. And the owner was recladding it, and I was going along to look at the framing for him. And it so turned out that it turned into a claim. He took a claim on the property, and I just happened to be there. So I fell into that type of work. And from there, that claim went to trial, and then I picked up other litigation work following that. And that basically set me off on a course.
So I guess just coming back to the surveyor thing, so we get it a lot, and you probably get the same as we're quantity surveyors. So we got surveyor in our name. You're building surveyor, so you got surveyor in your name. You got land surveyors with surveyor in your name, and we often get mixed together. So
that's right.
I guess we look after quantity surveyors are typically looking at cost, so understanding the cost of buildings and measuring things from that point of view. Land surveyors are doing the cadastral, so working out where things are located in space. So how would you describe a building surveyor in a sentence or two?
We look after the construction process and within the industry. So we provide a global overview. We come in. We're not a specialist in any particular field. We just provide that global overview and bring it all together. So I frequently get rung up and asked, "Can I go and do a land survey?" And I no, that's not what I really do. But it is a difficult thing. I must admit, it is one of those professions where it's hard to describe what you do. When people ask me, "What do I do?" I have to, take 10 seconds, think about it, and then I go, "Well, it's a bit hard to describe."
Yeah, it's certainly a lot broader than. Because I guess you could even be doing what we do as part of your the scope of what some building surveyors probably do. Element of cost involved in it, so it probably is a bit harder to explain.
It is, and some building surveyors are really good. They involve themselves in establishing policy and helping write standards and the building code and their influence within brands and other institutions. So there's a fairly broad spectrum within us of some very intelligent and qualified people who do a great job.
Right, including yourself, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the context we're talking about a bit today is probably the sort of when the problems come in. So as a building surveyor, you're coming in and looking at building condition, looking for issues, trying to understand that. So what are the sort of typical things you get involved in, and what would the difference be between, say, residential or commercial projects? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I guess there is a little bit. So we're usually the ambulance at the end of the cliff, I guess would be a good way to put it.
Bottom of the cliff.
Bottom of the cliff, sorry, the bottom of the cliff. Yeah, yes, exactly. So my calls come usually from lawyers or owners who have been referred to a building surveyor because they have a problem. That's not always the case. Sometimes the building surveyor is there to project manage a job. So that is a different skill set to what I bring to the table. For me personally, it's usually I'm there because there is a problem, and they're looking for somebody to establish what that problem is and what they do about it and how they fix it, and of course who's responsible for it. And that's where I come in. So commercially, residential, commercial, you don't get as much commercial. It tends to be residential or apartment residential.
Right. Yeah.
So it's one or the other. Back in the old WHRS days, it was just
WHRS?
the Weathertight Services Group.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So it was all residential. And it was rather specific. The WHRS was really only related to external moisture, where now the claims are very widespread. You know, they're structural, the fire, the weather tightness, the acoustics, the, H1, the list goes on. It's just endless, the claims.
Sounds like it's more multi-unit than single unit?
Yeah, well, you still get your residential claims where somebody has had an issue with their property, but a lot of it is apartments and commercial buildings that have problems or construction issues. And we're seeing more and more of that, I guess, to some degree. We're getting those construction disputes that are coming along now. And that's sort of inevitable as the population's grown, and the skill base that's come into the country is not quite as maybe starts from a different place to where we've started from.
There's certainly some nuances to how we build in New Zealand. That
absolutely.
There's potentially a few, Australia, Canada, maybe there's a few jurisdictions that build similar, but a lot of jurisdictions build quite differently.
That's right. And the training, they're coming in with apprenticeships that they've received overseas, not in New Zealand. And of course, you've got, a raft now of new, in the old days we had weatherboards. It was weatherboards on your house or it was nothing. Yeah. Well, now there's just multiple cladding types. So that's very common now. We've got products upon products upon products for people to choose from. Building wraps are a good example for one. Yeah. And I see the government talking about removing even those restrictions. Or they've done it, have they? Yeah. So that's going to open the door even more. And the problem that brings, of course, is how do we verify that the products are suitable for use?
Yeah, I was at a specified, so the EBOS's conference yesterday, and the building performance unit of MB were talking, and just talking about how some of that framework works and how things fit together. And I think what they've done makes sense in a lot of ways. So what they're saying is if there's a good international standard and the product can be proven by a reliable, credible lab to comply with that standard, and that standard is consistent with our standards, then that product will be deemed to comply. Yeah. So it's not quite open slather for anything. They've actually got to be complying with a decent standard, and that's got to be recognised by a decent organisation. Yeah. So I think it does open things up. Whether I think there's definitely some challenges around it, but to me it's relatively logical that if you've got a European manufacturer that's making to a European standard, why do we say in New Zealand, no, you can't use that here, you've got to go and spend 50 grand with brands to get your product tested?
Well, some of that is because we're if you're building if you've got a product in Mexico where you've got a beautiful hot climate and never rains or something, that's quite different to the New Zealand climate where we get a 50 knot nor'easterly like we had in the weekend.
And 10 metres of rain.
And 10 metres of rain a year. So, hence we had the issue back in the 80s and 90s with monolithic claddings. Yeah. We thought, well, we love the look of that. Who doesn't want that sort of, desert look? And so we threw it up left, right and centre without really knowing what we were doing and had all sorts of problems. But, I think it's a good thing that there are lots of choices, as long as there's good regulation in place that protects the end user from those choices. So that'll be interesting to see how the government deals with that.
I think that, I definitely agree. There's still quite a lot of unknowns about how it's all going to play out. So you touch on regulation, and before you talked about the building code, so maybe just have a little bit of discussion about how all of that fits together. So you've got the Building Act that sort of is the starting point for it all. So
yeah, that's right. We had the 91 Act, and that changed. We've got the 2004 Act. And there were some subtle changes within the 2004 Act, apart from being probably 3 times longer. But part of that was a way that the councils would assess co-compliance and issue a building consent. But the 2004 Act contains the 91 regulations which complain the building code. And it seems that within the industry there lies a little bit of confusion. People don't quite understand. If you go on a building site, as I did for years when I was building, and you ask somebody, is this built right? And I go, yes, built to the building code. But what they're really referring to is that it's built to 3604, or it's built to an acceptable solution, if they know what an acceptable solution is. So the building, so basically what you have this triangle where you have the Act sitting at the top, with the regulations below it, and then you have your building code.
And the Act basically defines a performance expectation?
That's right, yeah. The Act's all about creating a healthy, sustainable and safe, and durable complex, and then it sets out all the criteria within that, defines it all, who's responsible, who isn't, what an LPB can do and what they can't do, what the ways that the TAs have to perform and what they have to allow for when they set up their practices. And then that's very separate again to the building code, where the building code really is, used to be 37, I'm not sure how many it might be now, 39 clauses probably around there, I think 39 or 40 clauses. And they just set out the performance, how the building should perform, how your building work should perform. They have an objective, a functional, and a performance criteria. And each clause has that, and it's not prescriptive, doesn't tell us how to build, it just says that
you've got to achieve this outcome.
You've got to achieve that outcome. You can't fall down, it can't leak, shouldn't catch on fire.
Shouldn't lose too much energy.
That's right, that's exactly right. Yeah, and then sitting below that, of course, we have our acceptable solutions and our standards. So the acceptable solution might cite a standard and so forth. And then...
and so those acceptable solutions and standards, if you do something that complies with them, so it's consistent with them, then that means it meets the building code. So it's a way of, instead of having to prove, you can come up with your own thing, you can invent whatever it is, and you might know that it complies with the code, but you're going to have to do a whole lot of work to convince everybody that it complies with the code.
That's right.
Whereas if you say, okay, it's built to this standard and you can check off the stud spacing or whatever, then that's deemed to comply.
Deemed to comply, as long as it falls within all those criteria. So, depending on what acceptable solution is, it's got to fall within the criteria of that acceptable solution. But it's deemed to comply, and anything that isn't in that acceptable solution or that standard, it becomes an alternative solution. So most builder, if you look at again 3604, that's limited to light timber frame buildings up to about 10 metres, I think it is, 3 levels or 2 levels.
4 maybe.
And but once you're beyond that, you become an alternative solution. So all your big apartment buildings and a lot of these commercial buildings are all alternative solutions. And it's just understanding that. So that's probably, if there was one thing you could say to a builder, would be to get a good understanding of the differences. And I see now with LPBs, so in order to accomplish all your CPD points for LPBs, they do a lot of that stuff now, which is really good to see. There are code words that are always being fed and they're having to work their way through. But that is the key, is understand how the Act works and what it means to you. If you're working in an acceptable solution, are you following it accurately? If you're using a product, are you following the product literature properly? Are you following it as it should be? So if it has a brands appraisal, are you installing that that product in accordance with the brand's appraisal, or the way you're installing it, is it outside the brand's appraisal? Because the brand's appraisal might only relate to an acceptable solution, not an alternative solution.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to be very careful with the use of it.
And that affects all of the parties that are involved through the process. So they've got to make sure that whatever they're doing fits within however that particular system they're looking to use.
That's right, yeah. So you would have, generally the way that it comes about is you get your building consent and your architect will design whatever he's designing, that house perhaps. And he at that point there, he's working out whether it's an alternative solution or it's an acceptable solution. Have I got? Am I referencing the right products? And if I am, are they applicable for this use? And then the council they assess all that information and they issue their building consent on the basis that it will comply with the building code if you build it in accordance with the consented documents.
So the designer's role is to figure out all of the different systems they're going to use, be able to show to the council, these are the systems going to use, this is how they comply with the code. The council basically then QAs all of that and checks to say...
ask the question.
There might be RFIs, requests for information.
That's right.
Backwards and forwards. And so then once the council's satisfied that what the designer's come up with is they've demonstrated that it complies with the code, then they issue it a consent?
They issue a consent, yeah.
And then what's the responsibility of the builder from there?
Well, responsibilities are set out in the Act, are set out in Section 14 of the Act, A, B, C, D, E. There's the responsibility of the owner, the builder, the architect, the designer, and so forth.
Okay, so let's talk through each of those. So with the owner, what sort of responsibility does the owner end up with through this process?
So the owner has a responsibility under the Act to obtain a building consent. So the owner has to build it, ensure that it's built in accordance with the building code, and if it doesn't require a consent, so if a building owner carries out building work, he's got to make sure it complies with the building code. So that's Section 17 of the Act, which says that all building work's got to comply with the building code.
And that's the owner's responsibility?
Owner's responsibility, yep. So he owns the property, and it's then the owner's responsibility, if it needs a consent, to get that consent. And then you have the responsibilities of the designer and the responsibilities of the builder. And I'd have to check on the wording for the designer, but the builder's generally the builder's responsibility is that if they carried out building work that requires a building consent, that they will make sure there is one, that they do that work under a consent, that they are, if it's restricted building work, that they have the correct LPB licensing and qualifications to do that work. And that's essentially their responsibility, and to make sure that the building work that they carry out is, if there is a consent, is carried out in accordance with that consent. So what you have is all roads lead back to this consent and building it in accordance with the building code.
Right, and so the council's ticked it off as complying with the building code then. So through the construction process, then obviously compliance is critical. So how do we demonstrate compliance through those different steps? So I guess we've talked a bit about the design one, and it's demonstrated by the council going through the documentation saying, yes, you've supported that it complies with the code. So when it's actually during construction, how's that compliance assessed? Well,
you have, if we just take a standard residential house, for example, the key there is for the builder to build it in accordance with the plans. So he gets his set of plans. In my day, there used to be about 5 sheets, and probably yours too.
Yeah, we actually did a house the other day. I can't remember. It had been burnt down. It was a fire, and we were involved in an argument with the insurance company around how much it was going to cost to rebuild it. And it was like 3 sheets. Floor plan didn't even have the internal walls or anything. It was just like an outline, and it had the kitchen, bathroom, laundry on it, and that was it. And then like a couple of elevations.
About
1980 something.
Yeah, I remember being given, we'd be taken to a clear site, and I'd be handed a set of plans and say, build the house, and you'd open it up, and the first, page 1 was the cover page. page 2 had just the general elevations, before and after, before and after. And then there was a floor plan, a roof plan, and some footings, and that was it. Now it's really different, and we have very comprehensive plans. And that's been driven a lot, I guess, through litigation, because, we've looked at the building and said, well, how did you know how to build it? You didn't have sufficient information. And of course, there's risk with all of that. So now,
and obviously, they're with the council with the joint severally liable thing that's up for discussion now, because the council effectively is probably the only one that's ultimately going to be standing through the whole thing, because everybody else pretty much can disappear on the way through. So they've become definitely much more liability aware, and they want to make sure that those documents they're consenting are as detailed as possible, so they can check that it's actually been built against those detailed documents.
Yeah, they're very risk averse, and they should be too. Everybody should be risk averse, because when you're risk averse, then you're more cautious and careful in what you do. And you're right, the council, I mean, in the old days with those 5 sheets of plans, the argument, I guess, was, how did the council know it was going to comply with the building code, because there wasn't enough information.
Yes, didn't even have, it was a pole building, so it was like a story and a half off the ground with poles, and there wasn't even details on the connections between the pole and the floor. And so everybody just knew
that's right.
how it worked.
And of course, that's what it was like, wasn't it? In the old permit days, that's how we built. I remember I'd be on a job as a youngster, and the building inspector would come along and go, "Oh, Andrew, and mate, I don't have to look. I know you're going to do a good job." And you go, "No, come on and look." But they were generally,
in Aussie, the drawings we get in Aussie are still more like that than ours.
Are they?
Yeah. No, so it's been a bit of a challenge. Well, certainly when we started working in Australia, it was a bit of a challenge. They was figuring out exactly what the details were, because at least here we got half a chance. The drawings are much more detailed, but we've also been working here, and so Aussie was new to us. So what are the details? And over there, they just seem to assume that everybody knows
how to do it. Yeah. And that was the case here, wasn't it, for years? And generally speaking, we all did, because we built the same old house time after time.
Much simpler.
They
say it was all weatherboard.
Pile footings, and timber floor, timber frame, and weatherboards and a metal roof. I mean, that was it. And everybody knew what to do, and they generally didn't fall down. Moved around a little bit here and there, but they generally did pretty well. But now the detail is extraordinary, the detail that's required. And of course, it's, for a lot of construction firms now, they understandably are saying, look, if I don't have a detail, I'm not going to build it. Why would I take that risk?
Because as a builder, it's your role to make sure that what you build complies with the drawing. If there's no drawing, how can you make sure what you're doing complies with it?
That's right.
If the drawing isn't there and you make a decision on what it is, then potentially you're opening yourself up for liability around whatever detail.
As a designer, you become the architect, I guess, when you do that. You've taken on that design role. And to some extent, they do. It depends what the contract is worded. But generally these days, most builders will go back to the council. The council will pick up where there's an omission or something. There'll be that minor variation or that amendment that comes through.
You'd like to think that now it's pretty rigorous that those sort of things shouldn't come through. But sometimes you get it where there's like a little flashing detail or whatever that's been missed.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, you wouldn't expect to have every single detail imaginable, where every nail goes, or how a membrane applicator would form a joint. Those sorts of things you'd expect them to know. You don't expect to see those in a set of plans necessarily, unless they're critical for some reason. But the level of detail has become a lot more comprehensive, and you can see now that how councils do require that they want it there, and so do the contractor, so does the builder. And so how do we know how it complies? How do we get to that point where council come along and issue CCC and they're confident that it's happened? It happens because the builder's followed the plans. He hasn't gone off on a tangent, done something different. And the council have carried out, had a good inspection regime in place and good processes and policy, and they've managed to see all that occur to a reasonable standard, reasonably, and there's a good QA process in place. And so we're getting there. We're getting all that done, which is great.
So how do you think this change that's being talked about, where having builders self-certifying, is going to work? Because we've had, for now, we've got the council doing this checking. I guess it's pretty early days, and to me there's a lot of unknowns around it. So have you put much thought? Has there been much discussion in the
there's been
surveyor world?
Been a little bit of discussion in the background. Personally, I think it's a disaster waiting to happen. That would be my gut feeling. People I've talked to share similar views. there will be inevitably some people out there, some builders out there, or some people in the construction industry who may take advantage of that situation. It's going to happen. I can't see that it wouldn't.
Through intent or incompetence, I guess.
That's right, yeah. And to avoid cost or whatever else, or just wanting to get it through. So it seems to me that by doing that, you're removing that QA that comes from an independent source. You've got the person doing the building work who's going to self-certify his own building works. To me, that looks like, it sounds like a conflict of interest. It's like having me install, do some building work and then issue my own PS4 for whatever it is, or PS3 for it. You've got to wonder, is there a conflict of interest when I issue that, when perhaps we might know that it's not right. So,
or you think it's probably okay.
Yeah. So I think that it's going to definitely create some challenges, and what I wonder now is how will that pan out? So when will we find out that is a problem? Is it going to be in a year or 2 years or 5 years, or will it be at 10 years, 1 month after the liability period's over? Yeah. When are we going to discover that becomes a problem, at which point it's too late? So, I see it as a problem. I mean, how do you sort of look at it?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that, the leaky buildings is an example of where we didn't have that level of detail, didn't have that level of inspection. The industry has responded largely driven by the council having that liability, and so they've been a bit anal, but you can understand why, because they're effectively insuring the whole building industry as a result of the way the current system is. So we're sort of almost jumping back to the 80s, and it definitely makes me pretty nervous.
I think it's the same with I see there are problems happening with the remote inspection issue as well. I see that's going to have a bit of a problem. I understand a little bit of that went on during the COVID period when councils couldn't get out. That was difficult for them. But I see that being also have similar headaches, because, there's nothing like getting there in person and looking at it, is it? Eyeballing it and looking around the corner where the builder didn't want you to look.
Yeah. Unless... So we do a bit of that with, because we do progress claims. And we've developed a process where we generally don't go to site, and we rely on the builder giving us a description of what they've done and then giving us photographs that allow us to visually confirm it. I guess it's a little bit different, because as long as we can see it's happening, then we're happy to say, okay, well, that work's been done. We're not assessing the quality of it or that sort of level of detail. I guess part of it, what's going to come in is, I don't think anybody could turn up, complete their apprenticeship, go out on their own and be able to sign stuff off straight away. So I suspect the thing that's going to make it work is they're going to have some sort of pre-qualification to get to the point where they can self-certify. And then my view, there should be, if they're going to do it, as some sort of audit process, so whether it's a random audit or whatever. And if there's issues picked up, then that builder then loses the right to be able to self-certify his or her work as a result of it. And it may be they're not able to do it for a period of time, and then maybe forever if they do it twice. Yeah. So there needs to be definitely some way of bringing some accountability.
Yeah, I think that's got to be the key, doesn't it? Picking the right people, making sure you're happy with them, the council being satisfied that they know that contractor or whoever is doing the work, and going, yep, we're fine with them, that's no problem.
And potentially it could be systems based, that the building company's got to demonstrate that they've got processes in place to be able to do those checks. So maybe you're going to have to go through some sort of application process and prove that your business is capable. You're not. Yeah. So it may be. I don't think it's going to be industry wide. I think it'll be a portion of builders. Yeah. Obviously, the group builders are willing to jump into it, but. If anybody's going to cut corners, are those guys more likely to do than a...
Look, who knows? I mean, you'd never want to... I don't think you can point a finger at anybody in particular that would do that. And you'd like to think that everybody's honest and, they're just doing their best out there in the industry, So that's got to be... I think that's a good default place to start, that people are genuinely honest and doing a good job. Yeah. So I'd hate to think that would occur, but...
Hey, we've got to protect ourselves.
You've got to protect for that happening. And when I say protect ourselves, I think what we're looking to do is protect the end user. which is the person that's left with the product.
And paid for it. Yeah.
And paid for it with a lot of money, that's right. Yeah, and that's where a lot of claims I see coming from right now is that they've, you've got a homeowner who might have taken, bought into that that sales pitch, got somebody they trusted, and then it's gone horribly wrong because it was a shortcut. Yeah. Isn't that what Fairgo was all about or something? Or?
So what point, I guess you ideally wouldn't be involved and you wouldn't have a job, but I guess reality isn't that. So where will you typically start coming in, and when would somebody be looking to engage somebody like yourself?
Well, so as said, the majority of my work is litigation work, so that's what I do most of. So they generally engage me once they know they have a problem. So it can be a small thing or a big thing. So that work comes to me because either I get contacted by a lawyer or I get contacted by the homeowner who has usually been recommended they go and find a building surveyor to have a look at it. And at that point, it's go assess the issue. They listen to them, go find out what the problem is, work out how big the problem is, and then usually what they've got to do to rectify it. As far as the claim goes, that's really up to them. They have to decide what they do, whether the claim is big enough to warrant litigating. All right. Because that's a definite cost when you have a cost of lawyers and building surveyors and various other experts.
Yeah, and we quite often get involved in the value things. So,
So those costs add up pretty fast. So the claim's got to be of a significant level.
What sort of value would you?
Well, I got a phone call. I'll give you an example. I had a call from a young couple who bought a house. They had some issues with some bathrooms. We discussed it on the phone and what their options were and what everything else and the cost. And then I said, what do you think the cost is to fix all of this? And I think it was around about $30,000, $40,000. At which point I go, well, it's terrible that you're in this situation, but to engage a lawyer, to engage me, do the investigation, and then all your risk of recovery, you got to weigh out whether it's worth you even bothering, or just take it through the small claims or do it yourself or run it that way. But it used to be in the old days, I say the old days, the WHRS days, so that's going back, 10 years or so now, really, when we were in the thick of it. We were thinking that if you had a claim that was below that $200,000 threshold, it was
to come up with some other solution.
It was getting to that point by cost versus reimbursement and your risk that it may not have been worth taking. It was borderline
because there's a risk you'll lose it.
Risk you lose, and all the costs that go through it, and the cost to again for your lawyers and your experts
and time.
That cost has risen now. So generally speaking, you're sort of $1 million claim 10 years ago was a big claim. $1 million claim today is just a normal claim. Yeah, right. It's an average claim. So it's not a lot. But you're seeing, I guess, what would be this turn at the point for somebody to bother with an expert to properly run a claim. I guess you'd have to say,
$400,000 or $500,000.
I would have thought, well north of at least 250, 300. That would be probably my
minimum if we start contemplating it.
Before you're really starting to, pump in with a whole lot of money and expert witness work. I mean, you can spend, a large, huge, some of these massive apartment complexes with these claims. You'll spend to get and go to trial will cost an apartment complex could cost them millions of dollars before they see a cent. Mm. So it's something you have to think very carefully about. But a good expert will advise their client about their risk, and
risk as in likelihood of succeeding or not.
That's correct. How strong the claim is by what evidentially. I mean, we're not lawyers. We can't advise them like a lawyer would advise them, but we can tell them whether we think their claim, whether the defects are strong, whether they're weak, whether, who might be liable for that defect.
So you're forming a view of who's liable at that point?
Yeah, and the reason we do that is not because we're lawyers and we're looking to point a finger.
Not a judge, because ultimately a judge would be making.
We're not a judge. We're doing it because we have to establish for there to be a claim for the lawyers to sue somebody, they have to know who did that bit of work. Yeah. So we'd have to go and say, oh, well, Nick Clements did he was the QS doing that part of it, and Andrew Gray was the builder doing that part of it, and such did this. and they'll go, well, you've got these 10 defects. Who was responsible for that defect? And you go, well, this person, but not that person.
It was a design issue versus a construction issue.
That's right.
The designer designed this, but the builder's built something different.
That's exactly right.
You were starting to make those sort of identifications.
Yep. We'll get asked those questions, and we'll have to come back and say, for these reasons, we think this person was responsible for that defect, and this was responsible for that. And then, the same with council. Should council have seen this or not seen that, or done this or done that? And depending on the experience of the building surveyor, they'll be able to answer those questions. Yeah.
So helping everybody paint a picture as to your view of what the likely outcome is, so that you then can start making decisions on
best path forward. Yeah, and then the next step, of course, is properly gathering that evidence and presenting it in a way in a manner that your lawyer can then use it. So, we have to properly investigate it, identify it, work out the scope, the repair, the cost. Well, we don't do the cost, but somebody else will. Yeah. And then, but with these larger apartment buildings, they're very complex now. The claims of, in the old days when it was just a leaky building claim, it was pretty straightforward. You just had a building surveyor, a QS, and that was about it. But now we have much more complex issues. We've got steel-framed houses with thermal bridging and H1 issues. We've got, apartment complexes with fire-rated tenancy cells. You've got acoustic issues, structural issues, facade issues, seismic. Yeah. So your building surveyor suddenly goes from being the expert looking at the leaky building part to now being
coordinating the experts.
That's right. Well, essentially that's it. That becomes their role of bringing all these people together so that they can, as a team, come up with all the issues that are wrong with the building, identify all the things that need to be looked at.
So if I'm a builder, then how do I go about avoiding being sued for defects?
Have good insurance. Well, that's not going to stop you being avoided from being sued, I guess. But no, a builder, how would you avoid being sued? Understand the documents that you need to. So learn and become familiar with E2 AS1. Learn and become familiar with 3604 2011. Learn and know by heart the plans and specifications that are put before you. Read those documents. Just don't take the specifications and put it up on the shelf and let the dust gather on it. Read what it says.
Which can be challenging. I think there's room to improve in the specification area. When you see a 600-page document, where 95% of it is clip and paste, and there's 5% that really matters, and if you miss 0.1% of that 5%, you've got a problem. Yeah.
That's right. And, look for contradictions. Sometimes you might find, the plans say this and specs say that. So you've got to work out which is the superior document, and if you're not sure, or if there isn't one, then you go back to your architect and you ask the question. So for a builder, it's really important that they understand the consent documents, that they follow them accurately, they don't err from them, they don't depart from them in any way. If there isn't something in there and they don't know how to build it, they go back and ask the question, don't assume.
And if they're not happy about something, so even though it may be documented that way, if in their experience they think it's going to cause an issue,
ask the question.
Do they need to stick their hand up? If they build it, is that a defence? I built it as it said.
Well,
but knowing it was not going to work or it's going to leak or cause a problem.
Well, you would ask the question. I think if you're a builder and you're looking at something and you're thinking, I know he's designed it this way, I know that's how they want to do it, but I see a problem here, then you put your hand up. And you send an email to your architect.
So I was going to, documenting it would be an important bit, just not saying.
Document everything. That would be my number one rule. I do it. Most professionals do these days. We document everything. Put it in writing. Yeah. Get a paper record of it, or an email record, or a digital record, or whatever it's going to be. Ask the question and then have it come back and confirmed.
Even a file note, a diary note. It's not as good as having something. Two-way communication, but if you've had a conversation, if you note in your diary that you've had that conversation, then at least you can go back and you can flick through your diary and say, on this page, so okay, you might have forged it, but there's it would strengthen whatever case you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that. I did it yesterday. I do it all the time. I'll have a conversation with somebody, and then I'll go away and I will. It's quite cool through Word. You can dictate.
Yeah.
So I'll just bring my Word doc and I'll just go conversation with Nick, whatever, and I'll go. We just discussed this. We talked about this, and recommended he does this.
Yeah, and certainly contemporaneous records have more weight than you just saying, "Oh, I'm sure he said that." Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. In fact, you get that all the time. I've got one now where there were some conversations, and I remember at the time saying, just make a note of what that conversation was. Person didn't do it, and here we are. A year later, I'm going, "Do you recall that conversation?" No, I don't remember what they said.
Yeah, we get it quite a bit where a builder might ring up and say, "Oh, can you change this?" And then 6 months later, they're questioning why you've got that number in there. And if you didn't make a record, as they rang you up and said, "Change it to this."
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we do so many jobs; it's hard to keep track of them. Also, it's something a discipline we've. Yeah, I have to make sure I do it myself.
It's a really good discipline. Yeah, it takes a little bit of time, and it's just getting in that habit, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like that file note, just making that file note, or having the conversation, following it up with an email.
Yeah.
As per our conversation, we've agreed that I'll do this, or I'll do that. Please confirm.
Yeah,
or something as simple as that. Yeah. So that's really the builder is. Stick to the plans and specs, follow them closely, don't veer off them, make your file notes, learn and understand and know the building code, understand what good trade practice is. There are brands have published just volumes of good trade practice documents. Go and read them. If it's relevant, if you're going to be doing weatherboards in the next house, go and get the brand's good practice guide on weatherboards and read it.
And I guess if you're coming across, so like a lot of this, you'd like to think that by the time they got qualified as tradesmen, they've got it. But it may be that you've never built a weatherboard house. Yeah. And so if you're getting something new, it's definitely worth doing a bit of work and researching whatever that new thing is.
Yeah, it changes. I remember years ago I must have just been, I think it was around about 2010, going on a commercial building. And I was looking at the roof. The roof was up there, and he's putting these parapet cat flashings on. And I said, "Oh, look, that cat flashings, you got to have an under flashing there. It's not done properly." Blah blah. And he said, "Don't you tell me what to do? I've been putting on roofs since you were, in nappies, and nobody knows it's, And I'm so you're faced with that. I worked for a builder once. I turned up on him on the first day, and we were talking about something, and he said, "Nobody can tell me anything about building that I don't already know." So it's that type of you're trying to get past that that demographic of people and just build. And builders should have a very open mind. There's new stuff all the time. Go learn it. If you're putting on a new product you've not put on before, get the tech literature for it, read it. Know what its limitations are, know how to install it, know how to do it properly, and be careful. The other thing I would say with builders is that I would be careful about carrying out building work where there is no consent. Just understand what the schedule to the Building Act, how it reads, understand its implications, and be very, very careful. It's a dangerous, there is lots of work you can do under the schedule. There are some good documents that have been published, I think, by MB on what you can and can't do in the schedule. But if I've seen recently, I must have had at least 3 or 4 claims come in recently off the back of builders or contractors, not necessarily builders, but different contractors doing work they thought they could do under the schedule, only to find out that they couldn't.
And that's obviously opening them up to a lot of risk.
So on that case, when you've got that situation, if I was a contractor and you've been asked to do some work under a schedule, go talk to somebody. If you're not sure, ring up a building surveyor. Ask them, can I do it? Even if it costs you, an hour of their time or something, just get some advice.
That's great. That's great advice, Andrew. Yeah. So is there anything else, any burning issues, anything else you want to raise that we might not have covered?
No, I don't think so. I think that's about it. It's certainly an interesting industry that we have right now. Yeah. There's a lot happening. it's pretty exciting in some ways because there's so many changes that are afoot. And yeah, I just sort of wish everybody out there good luck. Be careful. You know, what is it? What was it? Hill Street Blues? What did they used to say? Hey, be careful out there. Yeah. So same to everybody in the industry. You know, tick your boxes. Be careful. Yeah. Check everything first. If you don't know, ask. Get some advice.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for taking the time and sharing your experience with us.
No, thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, everybody. So if you want a QS that really understands this building process and what costs are, then come and talk to YourQS. Hopefully you don't need to talk to Andrew, but he's open to talking to. So if you've got some advice, you're having issues or you're concerned about something you're looking to do, then Andrew is a great place to start for a building surveyor that really understands the building process. Thank you.